Hi guys, Jonathan here again in the room full of guns to present you with another interesting historic firearm. We have got two on the table, as we sometimes do. That's for comparison purposes. But the real star of the show is this one. And for those of you following along over on social media, by now you'll have realised for sure what it is that we were showing you. It's a Baker rifle. But, as you will notice from me showing you this right now, it's not a conventional Baker rifle. It hasn't got any sight on the barrel here. Pretty critical for aiming a rifle. And we'll show you up close, but there is in fact no rifling in this bore. It's a completely smooth bore, unsighted Baker rifle. Now, for those of you who aren't super familiar with the Baker, just before I move on, let me show you, I was going to say real Baker. They're both real Bakers, but in different ways, as I will explain. But there is that sight. This is a later pattern, as I will shed a bit of light on in a minute. But that is a notch type rear sight. And front sight, little brass blade on the front there, and it's got some pretty chunky looking deep rifling that we can show you there. So this is one of the many variations on the famous British Baker infantry rifle. So this was issued on a sort of regimental level basis from 1800. So it's not for every infantryman by any means. It's a specialist weapon for light infantry tactics. Plenty of other videos that go into depth on the significance of the Baker. We're here for this particular example. So, what on earth am I going on about? A smoothbore Baker with no sights. Well, and I suppose I should immediately, firstly address, there are smoothbore Baker replicas, reproductions out there. Those are for legal ease, if you like. Those are for people in the UK, perhaps elsewhere, to own on a shotgun certificate, because a smoothbore gun is easier to own. And that's for reenactment purposes. So you can shoot a blank charge out of those things, put it on the wall or something, if it hasn't. There's different flavours of that as well. We won't get into that. Suffice to say, there are Bakers that are smoothbore, but they have the sights on them because they're meant to look the part. They have to look like a real Baker. That's very much not what we have here. What we have here, for the very sharp-eyed, is actually a sealed pattern. What's a sealed pattern? Well, this seal is rather nicely preserved. So we have, it's a little worn, but you can see the 3 cannonballs and the 3 cannon of the seal of the Master General of the Ordnance. It's in a shield. You'll see this, well, in a number of different places. The Master General of the Ordnance was in charge of, well, an awful lot of stuff actually, not just ordnance, but artillery, small arms, you name it. And so this is literally, or almost literally, because it's not quite royal, but a seal of approval, a royal seal of approval, a government seal of approval, let's put it that way, to say that this is in all respects to the pattern for this version of the Baker rifle. Except it isn't, is it? Because it hasn't got sights, it hasn't got rifling. Also, the really sharp-eyed amongst you might notice there's no notch cut in the bayonet bar here. So you could slip a bayonet on here, potentially, but it wouldn't stay on. So another indication that this is in fact a sealed pattern for an unfinished Baker rifle. And then a final thing here, it is missing its front sling swivel. That's not deliberate. You can see the wear marks where it used to be. It's been lost, sadly. But the muzzle here is excessively long, but it has a groove cut, so a guideline to cut off this bit of the end of the barrel. So what does all this mean? Well, nobody, I don't think, is entirely sure. No one has set out in words, in print, what all of this means. But my interpretation of this, which I hope other scholars and things would agree with, is that it is, in fact, a sealed pattern for an unfinished Baker. Why would you want that? Well, most sealed patterns were the finished version of the gun you want to make, I don't know, 10,000, 50,000 of, whether you're making them in-house at your state arsenal or whether you're having them made by contractors, they would be precise in every detail because they are, instead of drawings, you take all your measurements from the sealed pattern and you go away and you make your 10,000 or whatever contract. The difference here would be all of these missing bits are things that a factory could do. And I think what we're seeing here is part of the story of the Royal Small Arms factory at Enfield in its relatively early days. Because the Baker rifle was the first complete firearm made at the Enfield factory. First established as a site in 1816, there is manufacturing, putting together, setting up of muskets and things going on at the Enfield site. This is North London, or Middlesex as it then was. But they hadn't yet got to the point where they were producing their own complete weapons, which was the point, really, of a manufactory. Previously, the Baker, the 1800 version, the 1815 version, they had been put together at the Tower of London from parts made around the country in the ordnance system of manufacture. Relates to the phrase lock, stock and barrel, in that those three components are what you need to create your final gun. So they're making firearms at the Tower of London, but they are doing it from ready-made assemblies, if that makes sense. The idea of Enfield, when it was fully up and running by 1823, which coincides with this final version of the Baker rifle that we're looking at here, is that they are making the thing from scratch. Okay, so you're probably still confused now, thinking, well, if they're making it all from scratch, they're making lock, stock and barrel, and they're putting it together, they're finishing it, they're doing everything you need to send finished Baker rifles out the door, why would they ever need an unfinished sealed pattern? Well, where I start to speculate slightly is that you could have in reserve a sealed pattern that any contractor could make. They don't need to be specialist rifle makers. They don't need the high-tech barrel rifling machinery. They don't need to be experts to go out and shoot the thing to get the sights set up and zeroed correctly. They have that expertise by 1823 in-house at Enfield because we know they're making complete Baker rifles with all of those features. So my speculation is that there might have been another complete sealed pattern Baker. There probably was. This would be one that you could send out in time of war, say, to contractors. They make all of the time-consuming bits, basically the whole gun, so technically is a gun, has no rifling, and then you send those batches, those go through Enfield, who are probably busy doing other things at that time in this imaginary war situation. Britain always wary of war with France at this time, of course. And then they cut the rifling. They cut off and crown the muzzle. They cut the bayonet bar for the bayonet. They fit the sights. They zero it. So they're only spending a minimum amount of time working on these things instead of having to make lock, stock and barrel, set up the whole gun, and then turn it into an accurate rifle. So slightly long-winded bit of speculation there, but it's really, for me, the only explanation that makes sense. Because this is no use to anyone in its current state. Other details we might want to look at, well, we have markings here, standard proof marks, crown, GR, broad arrow, and the crossed scepters, standard ordnance proof marks. We'll get you a look at that. And very faintly, because this has been polished and lovingly cleaned to within an inch of its life over the years, E. Baker is on the top here. So this bears the name of the inventor and the maker of the original sample arms. So the first few, the pre-production guns. And we do know that those cost 96 shillings to make, which is considerably more than the production rifles. Those cost 36 shillings, if I remember rightly, which is not as much more than a musket as you'd think. So 27 shillings was the cost of an India pattern musket, the standard infantryman's musket of the day. So the Baker cost a bit more, but perhaps not as much as you would think. But then these handcrafted sample arms for pre-production testing and stuff, we know those cost 96, so quite a bit more. This isn't that. This is something to control manufacture once manufacturing is ready to kick in. Serial production, if you like, except there are no serial numbers on these. The lock-on here, now the 1823 pattern, Baker, standardized on the 1796 pattern carbine lock. Now this is basically, it's not quite a Sten gun version of the Baker, but it is a simplified for ease and cheapness of manufacture version of the Baker. So instead of the series of different specialist locks that they'd used previously, they standardize on the same thing they're putting on the 1796 pattern carbines, and then probably had a load of in store, actually. And in fact, this one is standard marked to the Tower. It has Tower on the tail of the lock plate, the GR and the Royal Cipher on the side. Absolutely standard. You'd find that on, well, the 1796 pattern carbine, and probably some other arms that I'm forgetting at the moment. The production, pattern 1823, Enfield-made Baker, well, we have the same equivalent proof marks on there. We have Enfield inspectors marks, like this very nice one on the tang here, which we can show you, which is a crown over a number, and that number pertained to an individual inspector. Sadly, I don't think we'll be able to find out the name of that inspector in this case. It's a bit too far into the past. But later on, with Enfield-made stuff, you can look up a list and say that was Bob Smith or whatever. Not a real inspector, I made him up, as you might have gathered. And then critically for our story, although this one has basically the same Royal Cipher, although there are sort of artistic differences in how they're marking things by this time at Enfield, that's basically the same. The difference is on the tail of the lock plate, and it says RLMY, sort of punctuated in a certain way. Royal Manufactory is what that's short for. And then Enfield, famous name Enfield. So we often talk about the first Enfield rifle being the pattern 1853. Well, arguably, the first Enfield rifle is actually the Baker. But it's this final, last gasp version of the Baker that was made, I think, until 1830. The last batch was set up in 1838, I believe, 2 years after the Brunswick rifle had already been introduced, which is perhaps a rifle for another day. So the final version of the Baker is the first product of the famous Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield, as it would later become known. Thanks for watching, guys. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to support us in other ways, well, we have got our social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And over there, you can play along with our What Is This Weapon every week. Those teasers, if you like, do tie into this video series, but you're just as welcome to watch the series on its own as well. And of course, any other content that we put up on the Royal Armouries YouTube channel. And of course, the usual like and subscribe, that would be great. If you'd like to donate to us, you can find out how to do that from a link in the description. You can even become a member of the Royal Armouries as well, also in the description. But most of all, thanks for watching. See you next time.